All right, good afternoon or morning, boys and girls, or evening, depending on what time you are watching this video. This video is going to be a little bit different today. Obviously, I'm going to be going over Lesson 19, Comparing and Contrasting Text. Normally, I would post a video of showing mostly of me, but I figured why not put more spotlight on the work that you had to do. So with that said, I want to go over first why this section was so important. So comparing and contrasting text. The reason comparing and contrasting text is so important is because when you compare and contrast different texts, you're going to see that a lot on different tests. Even though we don't have to take the Regents anymore, which, hallelujah, thank goodness, you're still going to see it going forward as you go into high school. You're going to probably get 2 or more texts, so stories, short stories, biographies, whatever, and you're going to be asked to kind of distinguish differences between the two, but also similarities as well. When you answer, when you're doing and answering comparing and contrast questions, it helps you as a student focus more closely on the details in a text while also improving how you comprehend a text. And also, when you pay that close attention to the reading when you're doing comparing and contrasting, it helps you better as a student retain and remember the information that you're reading. And then also just to know that knowledge that is gained while you're comparing and contrasting, it helps you understand how to organize information, think more clearly, and also express ideas more effectively in your own writing. So that's the reason why we do comparing and contrasting of text. Let's start at the beginning of Lesson 19, Part 1, Introduction, Comparing and Contrasting Text. It sets us up with kind of a background information of why comparing and contrasting texts is so important. And in the end, is a short way to get to the purpose, is it helps you understand the author's purpose. It says that each author might have a different purpose for writing a different point of view about the topic or access to different information. For an example, an author writing a biography or a true account of a person's life will have a different perspective than the person writing his or own autobiography. That just makes sense, right? So if you read a biography about, let's say, Helen Keller, that's, a story coming from about a person's life. It's a true account. But if you were to read an autobiography of Helen Keller, so Helen Keller actually writing a story about herself, it's going to be a lot different. So you can kind of see the author's purpose in both of the pieces. It might have a lot of similar information, but it also might be angled in a different way. So the first kind of examples they give you is talking about 1969. It takes me back to a show when I was a kid called Even Stevens. It was on the Disney Channel. And they sang a song that kind of went something like this.
We went to the moon in 1969. Not 1968, but a year later.
The first part talks about is the moon landing in 1969. And there's 2 different viewpoints. One is from just kind of a woman who actually witnessed the event. First-hand experience. She was in 1969. She witnessed the event. The other comes from a student's history report who didn't actually see the event take place, but they did some research, and that's what they found. And they wanted you to read both stories or both texts and kind of circle some information that's important in both texts. And then just to discuss kind of why you think the author wrote both purposes. Again, the first author discusses their personal experience, while the second author writes to inform readers. When reading different texts on the same topic, you can compare and contrast the author's purposes and points of view. This can help you understand why each author chose to include certain details and leave out others. Why would an author write? What is an author's purpose? And usually there's 3 different reasons. An author's purpose is either to inform, to entertain, or to persuade. That's usually the most common reasons you see for author's purpose. So as we go through this packet, try to think of the reasons why the author chooses to write each of the texts that we go over. it's important to determine the author's purpose while reading, because depending on the author's purpose, he or she might represent only some of the important details, while other authors might present more vivid and clear details. Readers might not get the whole picture or all of the information depending on how the author puts out their information. It also is important to talk about facts versus opinions. We obviously know that fact is information that can be proved to be true, where an opinion is where someone thinks, feels, or believes something, not necessarily is true or false. Okay, so let's go on to page 188, where it talks about, it's the beginning of the story is, or the first part of the story is Born to Fly. It's by Anne Randall. It's a short biography of Amelia Earhart. We talked about how in March it's Women's History Month, and technically while you're watching this, it's not March, but it's not always a bad idea to go over some women in history that have done amazing things. Amelia Earhart, actually the very first time Amelia Earhart saw a plane, she actually wasn't even, that impressed by an airplane, which is crazy to think for somebody who's known for flying airplanes, that she wasn't even impressed. So in A Last Flight, which is a collection of diary entries published after Amelia Earhart passed away, she recalled feeling, the word it was unmoved, which is a thing, called the airplane a thing of rusty wire and wood. She wasn't even impressed. So that's pretty interesting to know. Interesting enough also that Amelia Earhart was a very good student but had no patience for school. After working with a voluntary aid detachment in Toronto, Earhart took pre-med classes at Columbia University in 1919, she actually ended up dropping out after a while. So not a huge fan of school, even though she was good. But that's neither here nor there. I want to get into the story, Born to Fly. Very interesting short biography about Amelia Earhart. Remember, it's a biography, so this is written about Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart did not write the story, because that would be an autobiography, okay? So let's go on and kind of discuss this conversation that we're having about Amelia Earhart. After you read Born to Fly by Anne Randall, it then asks you to do the following. Explore how to answer this question. How does the author's purpose influence the focus of the text and the details presented? It actually kind of gives you the answer. It says the author wants to focus on the early part of Earhart's life to explain her passion for flying. Which facts has the author presented to show how I'm struggling now. Amelia Earhart's experiences started her on her path to becoming a famous and fearless aviator. Aviator is just another word for a person that flies a plane. So on the lines below, explain the author's purpose. Find evidence in the text to support your answer. So, we should probably answer this using RAD. We can start by restating the question. Okay, so it says, and we can answer it in the same sentence. We can say the author's purpose of Born to Fly is to inform the audience about Earhart's early career and how she decided she wanted to be a pilot. So I restated and I answered the question. The author writes to inform readers about Earhart's early career and how she wanted to be a pilot. Now my job is to find detail in the text. So what I'm going to do is I am going to find somewhere in the text where it talks about kind of Earhart wanting to learn how to be a pilot. So what I'm going to say is in the second paragraph, in paragraph 2, it says, on December 28th, 1920, pilot Frank Hawks changed Earhart's life by taking her on her first plane ride. As you can see, I then added, in paragraph 2, it says, on December 28th, 1920, pilot Frank Hawks changed Earhart's life by taking her on her first plane ride. This is our first detail. I'm going to let you do your second detail on your own, but you get the idea. You would just find one more detail from the text that shows how the author informed the audience about Earhart and her early career and how she decided to want to become a pilot. On page 189, you come across another biography of Amelia Earhart. And it says, use the close reading and the hint to complete the activity. So automatically what you should do as a reader is you just read a short biography about Amelia Earhart and how she started on her path to become a pilot. And now this is the second one. So it just makes sense to you as a reader that you're going to compare the two. You're going to see what was similar between the two and what was different between the two. And just with that, it's asking you to fill out this chart in the middle of the page where it says fill in the chart below based on the two biographies you read. Write facts that are different under the title of each biography and write facts that are similar in the two biographies under both. Now, if you notice, it says write facts with an S. See how I circled that S? That's because they don't want you to just put one thing per box. If that was the case, it would give you one line. They're giving you 3 boxes, and they're larger boxes. So you need to put at least 2, if not more, per box. Okay? We need to challenge ourselves. We're going to be going to 7th grade, and it's more than just one thing per box. This isn't 1st grade. We can handle writing a little bit more. So your job is to put a few things in each box that are different for both biographies, but also the same. So it's basically like a Venn diagram, but in a chart form. So if we look at Born to Fly, which is the first biography we read, we would know that talked about a few things like how Amelia Earhart had her first airplane ride in 1920. It also talked about how she had flying lessons 5 days later after her first airplane ride. And then also she was a female altitude record. Now I'm going to go over to the right-hand side where it says Earhart on Equality and talk about some things that were only mentioned in that biography, not mentioned in Born to Fly. So things like first woman to fly across the Atlantic, that wasn't discussed in Born to Fly. It was only discussed on the second one. Also encouraged women to fly and be scientists, and also said women must try the same as things as men. So I'm going to write that under Earhart on Equality. Now we have both the Born to Fly section covered and the Earhart on Equality. Now we're going to discuss things that were mentioned in both biographies. So things that either characteristics of Earhart or things that happened in her life that were mentioned in both, okay? So in this section, I'm going to talk about how she was a female aviator. So we know from both stories, we're not relying on our prior knowledge. We're relying only on these biographies that we read. That we know that she's a female aviator. We know how fearless she was. And she also set records and made changes for women. So I'm going to write that under the both section. Now after we filled out this chart, what you should do now is to kind of do the show your thinking section where it says using the chart below, compare and contrast the presentation of facts in the biographies. What you could say is something about how both biographies name her as a famous, fearless aviator who set records. That's no question. You can see that in both. However, you're looking into specifics. The first biography, Born to Fly, focuses mostly on Earhart's early life and what motivated her to become a famous aviator. While the second writing or piece of writing, Earhart on Equality, focuses more on the accomplishments and how she was fighting for equality of women to do the same thing as men. Moving on to pages 190 and 191, we come across 2 different texts. The first text, which is called, well, it's from The Story of My Life, which was written by Helen Keller, is a memoir which basically talks, in a way, it's almost like an autobiography. Not paying so much attention to the facts and figures of Helen Keller's life, but she's really focusing and honing in on a certain part of her life. And that part of her life is when she learns about because Helen Keller's blind, she's learning about how to decipher what items are what items and how to figure out the things she's holding, what those things are actually are. So this is coming right from her own story, okay? This is her own life. This is her own experience. When you look at the second text, which is on page 191, A Remarkable Life by Mary Wilkes, this right here is not a memoir, but more so of a biography that has been written about Helen Keller. So both stories are about Helen Keller, both texts are about Helen Keller, but they're written by two completely different people. One is Helen Keller, and the other one was written about Helen Keller and how she was born in 1880. We then go on to page 192. So after we've read both texts, the questions they're asking have to do with the actual both texts. We're comparing and contrasting both stories that we just read, both A Remarkable Life by Mary Wilkes and the excerpt from A Story of My Life by Helen Keller. So, question 1 asks us, how does Helen Keller's purpose of writing her memoir differ from that the biographer who wrote about her life? So, in short, what it's asking is, the biographer, the person who wrote the story about Helen Keller, Mary Wilkes, they want to know why her story, the purpose of her story, is different than what Helen Keller was trying to get across when she was talking about the memories of her story in her memoir. So we have 4 different answers here. We have A, Helen tries to inform people about the facts of her life, but the biographer wants people to know about Helen's personality. B, Helen tries to explain her childhood actions, while the biographer writes to tell people about Helen's wild childhood. C, Helen wants to reflect on her experiences, while the biographer writes to inform people about her events in Helen Keller's life. Or D, Helen wants to entertain people by describing her point of view, but the biographer wants to amaze people with facts. Let's go through these. For question number 1, our answer is going to be C. The memoir includes more personal feelings and reflections on Helen's life. The biography includes more facts and is intended to kind of inform the audience. Choice A is incorrect because Helen doesn't want simply to inform people about her life. She wants to share her personal experiences. Choice B is also incorrect because Helen doesn't attempt to explain her actions, and the biographer never calls Helen's childhood wild. And choice D is incorrect also because neither text is written to entertain. The correct answer is C. Let's now move on to question 2 on page 192. The question asks, what event appears both in Helen Keller's memoir and the biography of Helen Keller? So we need to find an answer that occurs in both the texts that we read. If you're reading an answer and you're like, I don't remember that happening in one of the 2 memoirs, or maybe both of the texts, then it's probably not the correct answer. So let's go through the possible answers. A, how she lost both her hearing and sight. B, how she learned that things have names. C, how she learned to touch, read people's lips. And D, how she helped the blind all over the world. Let's go through what the answer would be. For question 2, the correct answer is going to be B, how she learned that things have names. Both articles mention the event when Helen realized that water meant cool liquid, or water. Choices A, C, and D are incorrect because those events are not mentioned in both texts, only in the biography. Going forward on pages 193, 194, 195, and 196, we learn about one of the greatest superheroes of all time, Spider-Man. In our first text, Stan Lee and Spider-Man by Simi Patel, we learn a little bit about the creation of the comic book character Spider-Man. We kind of learn more about how Stan Lee created Spider-Man and a little bit more about Stan Lee's life. In the second text, The Birth of Spider-Man by Max Bruno, we learn not so much about the creation, but more or less how it was a collaboration of many artists, such as Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, is also from Stan Lee. So both are about the creation of Spider-Man, but they tell different parts of a story. I'm not going to go through every single question, but I will show you the answers. For questions 1 and 2, question 1 asks, how does the author's purpose for writing the first article, Stan Lee and Spider-Man, differ from the author's purpose for writing The Birth of Spider-Man? So basically, how is the author's purpose different between the two texts? The correct answer for that is going to be A. The first author describes Stan Lee's version of the creation of Spider-Man. The second explains that there are different versions of how Spider-Man was created. For question 2, based on lines 7 through 20 in Stan Lee and Spider-Man, and lines 8 through 13 in The Birth of Spider-Man, what do both authors want the reader to understand about Martin Goodman and the creation of the Spider-Man character? The answer is going to be D. Martin Goodman didn't deserve credit for the creation of Spider-Man. So they told you, they said he does not deserve credit. Going on to page 196, question 3 and 4. Question 5 we'll go over together, but I'm just giving you the answers for hopefully you can decide if you got it correct or not. Question 3, which word in lines 8 through 11 of Stan Lee and Spider-Man best helps the reader determine the meaning of adolescent? Well, if you remember a few weeks ago, this word was brought up in one of the Percy Jackson chapters, and we went over that adolescent means teenager. So A is the correct answer for 3. Question 4, which fact appears in both articles? So it needed to be present in both articles. The correct answer is C. Steve Ditko created the art for the character of Spider-Man. We are now going to move on to the 5th question. The 5th question asks, compare and contrast the way the two authors presented information about Spider-Man in these articles. Describe similarities and differences in the author's purposes, their points of view, and the facts they chose. Use evidence in the articles to support your response. We are going to use RAD for our answer. We have to start with our R, which is restate. And usually our restate can trickle into our answer as well, our A. In short, what this question is asking us is how are the two articles the same and how are they different and what evidence do you have to support that? I started my restate in my answer, or in other words, I started my answer off by restating the question and answering it. That's our first 2 parts of RAD. I said that both articles tell about the creation of the character Spider-Man. The difference in the 2 articles is how and who was/were the actual creators. Now, we need to find details from the text to support our answer. For my details, I am going to take one quote from each of the articles that kind of show a contradiction between what's being stated in both stories. Now, in the first one, Stan Lee is basically saying that it was primarily his idea of Spider-Man. He thought of the idea as a kid, and he basically slowly created the idea of Spider-Man. Yes, other people helped, but it was mostly him. In the second article, it talks more about how it was like a multi-man decision of who Spider-Man was, how he came to be, and all that. So I want to showcase that in my details. So what I'm going to be writing for my details is, in Stan Lee and Spider-Man, in paragraph 4, Patel writes, according to Lee, the creation of Spider-Man had sprung from his reading as a child. My job next is to come up with one more detail that supports the original question. And the original question is asking, how do the articles compare and contrast with one another? So with that said, I'm going to come up with a transition, and then I'm going to come up with a detail from The Birth of Spider-Man, which is the other text, the one that's written by Max Bruno. I said, a detail that contradicts this information, so I just did a a transition. So a detail that contradicts this information can be seen in The Birth of Spider-Man, where Bruno writes in paragraph 4, Lee claims he asked artist Jack Kirby to illustrate his plotline, but later reassigned the job to artist Steve Ditko. This shows that it wasn't just Lee behind the creation of Spider-Man, that it was kind of a group effort. It's me. See, I said I wasn't going to be there for the most of the video, but I ended up wanting to come on at the end. I know that's a lot of information. That's why I want you to pace it out throughout the week so you're not doing all that work in one sitting. So it was a long video, but it was worth it. I hope you got some information gained during that, some knowledge gained that you can put in your mental toolbox. That's the last packet I'm going to have you do for a while. The next couple weeks is going to be a little bit different. So I'll still try to do YouTube videos, but it just won't be of me going over ELA Packet. So feel free to comment below if you have any questions or you struggled with something in this packet or you just want to
say hi. I love highs.
But this is it. I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you real soon.